good to see all of your smiling faces. I am Pastor Jack, and it is a real delight for me to be able to bring the word to you this morning as Pastor Rick and Lucy are on their way back from Uganda, hopefully now here in town resting and recovering, but you will get to see Pastor Rick back in the pulpit next week. But I get to be with you on this incredibly beautiful fall morning. Talked to a number of people this week. I'm being one of them who said, fall is my favorite season. Anybody else identify with that? Yeah, it's like half of the church. Ooh, we love the cool weather. We love the beautiful leaves. I like football season. And I also discovered something else this week, a whole new reason to love fall that was introduced to me. Crumble pumpkin cake cookies. Oh, man. Thank you. That's proof my wife loves me. She introduced me to these pumpkin cake cookies. I thought Mom always had the best pumpkin cake cookies, but then it occurred to me, for the price of those things, they really ought to be the best in the world too. So if you haven't tried one yet, now's your chance. Check it out. Enjoy fall in a whole new way. Fall is a season where we get to see the Lord's grandeur and power on display in a dramatic way. And I think it points us to the value in seasons. And our text even this morning, it says that there is a season for every activity under heaven. There's a time for all of it. And bearing that in mind, I wonder what comes to mind if I show you a picture like this. There we go. Little bit out of season. What might come to mind? Well, I see Evan back there is, middle school students. That's all you got to say, right? Boys being boys. But it's out of season. You can't ski when there's grass on the ground. Or a picture like this. There we are. Jenny called me out earlier saying, I'm almost ready for the legacy group. I'm just going to say that was Jenny last winter. No, not really. But good reminders that there's a reason we break ground to build for construction in the spring. There's a reason that baseball is played in the summer. There's a reason that harvest happens in the fall and that skiers ski in winter, right? Everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. The Message paraphrase of Scripture actually puts it this way. It says there's an opportune time to do things, a right time for everything on earth. And we seem to innately get this. It's not like we see farmers out there in their fields yelling, grow, grow, grow in the middle of January. They're not out there pulling out their hair in frustration saying, why aren't you producing when the ground is frozen? And yet that's what many of us tend to do with our spiritual lives. We always expect there to be growth. We always expect there to be this activity. We think it should always be summertime. And I think part of that is just the human condition. We're kind of conditioned to not be content. But part of it is because we're Americans, right? We always expect everything to be moving forward, for there to be progress. The economy's always supposed to be booming. Teachers are always supposed to be teaching more. Sports and athletes are always supposed to be progressing. We just take it for granted. It's kind of like our right? And so we think that when it comes to spiritual things, it should be the same. We should always be launching a program. We should always be looking for the next thing that's going to make us feel closer to God. The next new hit worship song or the next pastor, right? We've even taken to calling that person Pastor Next. And we have the spiritual equivalent of what I would call summit fever. Summit fever is generally, you all may just be aware of, is it's this concept that when someone is hiking a mountain and they put out all the effort and all the hard work and all the sweat to get so close to the top, but they're not quite there yet, there's nothing that anyone's going to do to turn them around. They're way too close now. I've got to get to the top. I've got to see everything around. I'm working hard for this view, for this moment, for the euphoria of saying, I did it. It's summit fever. But specifically, summit fever, mountain climbers know, can be actually life-threatening. There's this picture coming up here. This is of Everest on May 23rd, 2019, one of the deadliest days on the world's highest mountain. Everest is about 29,000 feet high, but above 26,000 feet is something called the danger zone. And this is the zone where most climbers get summit fever. They can see the peak in the distance, and there is nothing that's going to turn me around from that. I am going to get there. The problem is that the world's tallest peak has gotten so busy, there's a traffic jam. And what happens on Everest, if you don't turn around by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, chances are 99.9 that you're going to get caught in a ferocious storm and you're going to freeze to death on the top of the mountain. And that's exactly what happened on this unfortunate day of 2019. With summit fever, the same thing happens to us spiritually. We're reaching for something so hard, whatever's next, whatever the peak is, that we get into the danger zone of stress, the danger zone of unhealthy expectations. And just like mountain climbers forget that the goal isn't just to get to the top, the goal is actually to come back down, right? We spend too much time in the spiritual danger zone, and it's killing us. It saps the life out of us. And spiritual summit fever, it keeps us from realizing that there are actually seasons to our faith. There are times when we shouldn't just be looking for summer. Times when we shouldn't just be anticipating the beauty and the enjoyment of the harvest of fall. There are seasons. Ecclesiastes says there's a time for everything, an opportune time. And if there is a right time for everything, then presumably there is also a wrong time. Yeah, you got it. All living things, they've got this season, a cycle that has to be respected in order for healthy growth to occur. And if we cooperate with those seasons, then we can see our frustration decrease and our fruitfulness increase. And who doesn't want that, right? A little less frustration, a little more fruit. That's what we get when we cooperate with the seasons of faith. We have to remember that spring is for new life and renewal. That summer is for growth and abundance, that fall is for harvest and thankfulness, and that winter is for lying fallow and reflection. Now, I know that Jenny was just talking up here about, tilling the soil, but I'm guessing there's some folks here that don't know what lying fallow necessarily means. It's a farming term. It means when we let the soil rest. And the whole purpose of that rest, of not planting a crop in it, of not working it, of not cultivating it, is so that it can absorb the nutrients that are lost when the soil is overused. And that's when we see that and we cooperate that's when we experience less frustration and more fruitfulness. And this is a critical lesson for us to learn, both in our lives individually, but as a church as a whole. Pastor Rick, a couple weeks ago, he talked in his sermon about he said, healthy things grow, right? That was the primary takeaway of that particular message. Healthy things grow. And it was an opportunity to share with the church the vision statement that's been developed in this particular season. And the vision statement says that we as a church want to become obsessed with knowing Jesus, loving people, and sharing the reason for our hope. And that is a healthy vision. It is healthy and it may cause growth provided that health is pursued in a healthy, or the growth is pursued in a healthy way. And pursuing growth in a healthy way means cooperating with whatever season we're in. And these seasons of faith, this cycle, they mirror the life cycle of every living thing, right? We know that every living thing, there's a point where there's a birth, something is born, and then it grows, and then it matures, and then eventually there's a decline and even death. This is the life cycle of things, and the church is no different. Why? Because we're not an organization. I know sometimes, you hear recruitment for committees or whatever, and we think, oh my goodness, you just kind of get sucked in and never get out. The church at its best, it's not an organization, it is an organism, right? It's an organism. That means it has a life cycle. Birth, growth, maturity, decline, death. And though we never want to hear of churches dying, it happens. The greatest church planter in history, the Apostle Paul, none of the churches that he planted still exist. It happens. It is part of the life cycle, of a God-ordained life cycle. However, the Lord in his grace and in his love and in his call invites us into this life, this organism, to participate in its reproduction, in its growth. And the trick in church revitalization is when you start to see that decline before you get to the death point, you go back to the growth point, and then you start to see it happen all over again, right? Not that the church itself is reborn, although I guess that language would work in the church, right? But a healthy church does give birth to other churches. Amen? Can anyone say October 20th? Yeah, a little shameless plug there. We will celebrate the birth of a church. These cycles happen in any congregation. I don't know how many of you have taken time to read the 100-year history of Bay Presbyterian Church. You can't have my copy. It's already got my name on it. But if you do want a copy, of course, we have them in the church office. But this is just kind of a, pastor geek kind of thing. But it's one of the first things I read when I came to be a part of this church. And that's because you can learn a lot about a church if you know the history of it, right? Think about your family. Your family history probably is not written down. But if you were someone to ask you about it, you'd probably start with some history. And you go, boy, if you knew that history, you'd know everything you need to know, right? When you dig into this, you see that cycle, that life cycle, repeated over and over several times. It just happens. And that's the same story for any particular congregation. And it's no secret that the latest cycle that we've been into it's been a winter time. And there's so many that are looking forward with anticipation of spring. Boy, I just can't wait, right? It's like the end of February in Cleveland. You just can't take one more gray day. You can't take opening the window shade in the morning and seeing that rain drizzle down one more time. It's just like, I've got to go to Florida. Interestingly though, something I learned when I moved here, so many of you go to Florida like in June. I haven't figured that one out yet. It's glorious here in June. But at the end of February, it's like, yes, I cannot take that anymore. And the waiting is torture. The waiting is frustrating. And we're sometimes tempted to kind of want to be like that, the non-existent farmer that might go into a field in the middle of winter and yell at it, grow, 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 come on. But it's winter. It's not going to grow. And so it breeds frustration. Winter isn't for growing. It's for lying fallow. It's reabsorbing nutrients that were lost in overuse. It's for reflection. And so if you find yourself in a winter, whether it's related to your church family, your biological family, or something else, it's okay. And it's not just okay, it's God ordained. It's the cycle of life. If you feel like, I'm just not sure why that child or that grandchild keeps doing that thing. And it almost feels like it's sucking the life out of you and your family, or whatever that chronic struggle is, or that chronic sickness. And it's just like, end of February, I can't take it anymore. It's not to fight against. It's to cooperate with. And cooperate doesn't mean that we go out and we try to plant and dig in the middle of winter. No, we reflect. So we say, Lord, what do you have for me in this moment? What is it that you want me to learn? What are the nutrients that I can absorb? Because in winter, things only look like they're dead. That stark tree out there, It looks like it's dead, stripped of its leaves and lifeless, but in reality, there's something happening deep down below the surface. And I know that's so true for many of us. If not in this moment, at some point in life, you can relate to that. You know what that's like, to just be feel like you have been stripped and laid bare. And maybe like you could identify with the psalmist, who in chapter 88 said, I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. But we can't be deceived. We have to know that appearances are not necessarily true, and that feelings are not fact. God is at work deep down below the surface. He's creating a new life, and although winter can be desolate and it can be difficult, it is not a place without purpose. It's not a place without purpose, because winter has a fruit all of its own. It's not like the fruit of spring, where things grow so easy and abundant and plentiful, but it does have fruit. And I want to finish out this sermon by sharing with you 3 fruits of winter. And the first is prayer. It's prayer. That Psalm 88 that I just quoted for you, where it says, Lord, you are the God. It says, my life draws near to death. But that psalm begins with this prayer, this verse. It says, Lord, you are the God who saves me. You know, the psalmist isn't praying according to how he feels. He's praying according to what he knows. What he has experienced of God before in spring, in summer, in fall, in those moments when things felt free-flowing and growing and abundant. And he's remembering that. He's remembering God's provision for God's people in that life cycle of history that starts at Genesis and ends at Revelation, of birth and growth and maturity and decline and death. But yet God is faithful and he starts it all over again. And so he says, Lord, you are the God who saves me. Not the God who I hope will save me, not, what I'm seeing right now, but what I know to be true. And it's wintertime that produces this kind of prayer. It's wintertime that produces this kind of faith. In no other season do we have the opportunity to walk by faith and not by sight more than when it's winter. There's maybe not birds in the trees singing, there might not be buds on the branches, but we know God is doing something down in the roots, in the core. And the second fruit of winter, well, that's pruning. And it's not really a fun one. That can hurt when you're the one being pruned. Jesus said, I am the vine, and I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be more fruitful. You're cutting it off. And the reason pruning is necessary but difficult work, and the reason it happens in winter, is that in winter, the lifeblood, if you will, it kind of retreats to the core of the plant and down into the roots. And so you can take a limb off or a branch off or whatever without killing the plant. You can take off what's dead or what's diseased. But if you did this while the plant is in the full growth cycle, when everything is abundant and all the life juice is flowing, it's going to be an absolute shock to the system. Then it's going to cause the plant to recoil and be like, whoa, what just happened? I feel so much of me cut off. And when pruning's first done, it's not pretty. Something that at first looks stark, and now it just looks full on dismembered, like there's hardly any of it left. I remember a number of years ago, and me telling this story reminds me why Jenny said you could come to the Legacy event. My kids were still in elementary school, and I had taken the time while they were at school that day and had pruned up one of the trees in our backyard, and it had some problems, and I had whacked it back big time. And one of the kids gets off the bus, and my wife's gonna know exactly who I'm talking about, before their foot even hits the ground and all the boldness and brashness and confidence that the 7-year-old can muster, he says, "Why'd you kill that tree?" It didn't kill it, actually helping it. Actually, if you drive by it today, that old house we used to live in, the tree is full and green. And that's how it is with our spiritual life. Sometimes God is pruning back, and you're like, "Lord, you're killing me here? It hurts. Things look stark. It's never gonna live again." And God says, "No, just watch. Just watch. It'll come back." And if we learn to cooperate with that, we can save ourselves a ton of frustration. And we can learn to anticipate the fruit that is to come. And then the last fruit of Christmas that I just want to call your attention to, I think we could actually even call it a gift, even more than a fruit. It's a gift because it's God's presence. The fruit that we experience in wintertime is prayer, it's pruning, and it's presence. And the reason is that we experience God's presence in a way in winter that we don't necessarily when everything is great, is because winter makes us heavenly minded. It makes us look up because it feels like it's our only option. It teaches us to stop longing for the things of this world and start longing for the things of God. And we learn in winter that this world's trials, they're momentary and they're light in comparison to the riches of Christ's resurrection life in us. And the only way we fully experience the riches of that resurrection life is if we also share in the fellowship of his sufferings. Paul talked about this in Philippians chapter 3. He said he wanted to know Christ, to know the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. He had it figured out. You can't experience new life unless there's first been death. You don't get spring without winter. You don't get the glory of Easter without the grief of Good Friday. If you want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection, then you have to join in the fellowship of his suffering. And it's that place where you get the presence of God, where it's just you and Jesus, because everything else feels like it's been stripped away. And you know him in a way that you don't know him in the other seasons. And I know that we want spring to come. Whatever place you're at, it's just natural to be like, I want what's next. I want that fun, easy, light, and free. Whether it's in your church family or your regular family or your job or whatever, but don't miss what God is doing down deep. The opportunity that there is in winter. Don't miss or wish for what's next so badly that you miss what's now in front of you, that God has ordained it to be so. The temptation with spring is to think that it's our reward for getting through winter, right? I mean, how many of us have been like that? Not in February, but in April, when it is glorious here and you're like, finally. And the temptation is to think that's just the reward for having to go through all of that. And so we say things like, it's bleak now, but it will be better when. And we have to be careful about those kinds of expectations. Winter's not just something to be endured to get to spring. The Lord has you in this season for a reason. And so ask, what is it, Lord, that I'm supposed to learn? What is the fruit that you want me to enjoy? What is the fruit that you want me to bear? And the same is true for our church. We have to be careful of the expectations that we might have moving from winter to spring. Because, and if you don't hear anything else, hear me on this. When Pastor Next comes, Pastor Next will not bring springtime. Pastor Next will not bring springtime because there is only one Lord of the seasons. And he ordains the season that we're in. He is the one that brings winter, spring, summer, and fall. He is Lord of them all. I've been spending too much time with Keon because I did not mean for that to rhyme, but it just came out. He is Lord of them all. And Pastor Neck's job is not to save us from winter. It is to, with skill and affection, help us navigate all the seasons of our faith with faithfulness. To navigate all the seasons of our faith with faithfulness.